Good morning. On this week's episode of The Professor Helps, I'm going to talk to you about the hierarchy of suffering as detailed by Edith Eger. So first I need to address the fact that I'm dressed and standing in front of you, in front of a camera. There's power on. Last week that was not the case. I was crouched in the bottom of our van telling you about what we can do when we can do it, and there's just a very stark difference between those two things. So for anybody watching this who is in the state of Texas and is one of the 3 to 5 million people who was without power last week, it's a little hard to believe that I'm standing here with power and heat. And I think it's important to talk about these things. One of the reasons that I'm talking about it today is because all the conversations around me that I've been hearing from other people, the temptation when you hear what someone's story was of last week, their trauma, their difficulty, their loss of the basic things, you're tempted to minimize your own situation. So I think it's really important to dismiss that notion. Like, you might even start to do it and say, well, I didn't have it as bad as you. Stop. Because something that Edith Eger says, and she is a wonderful person, you should check her out. I'm actually going to post her quote below because I'm going to truncate it and paraphrase it. But it's a beautiful sentiment, which is that there is no hierarchy of suffering. Edith Eger is a Holocaust survivor. So, the temptation, I'm guessing, when someone is with her is to say, you went through the Holocaust. I have nothing to complain about. And the truth is that's actually not true at all. In her book, she has a client, she's a therapist, where she talks about the client is very disappointed because when she got her car, it was delivered to her in the wrong color, which sounds really like, oh my God, are you talking about suffering? Because that doesn't really sound like, well, it's suffering to her. And one of the things that Edith talks about is like the client actually tried to tell her, I can't believe I'm complaining about this to you. And it's just like, no, there is no hierarchy of suffering. You having suffering doesn't stop me from having suffering. And it doesn't mean I have to immediately lower my level of suffering because you also suffered. And I think that that's really crucial as we walk into the next couple of weeks and months where normalcy is starting to ebb back in. And I say ebb because I don't think there's going to be a full flow of back to normal. It's been a week since I was crouched on my van and reporting to you about my situation. And I still don't feel 100% normal. I'm turning off lights. I'm very excited that we have water. There was something taken though in those 77 hours of no power. The fragility of thinking that you're always going to have lights, you're always going to have power, and you're always going to have heat. It doesn't really exist anymore because of this thing that happened. And while I have talked a bit about my childhood, there were a lot of things about my childhood that were not great. We never had the power turned off. There was never a lack of heat. We always had shelter, and all of that was at risk last week at some point. And my husband and I tried many things. We tried to light the fireplace, but then we got worried about carbon monoxide poisoning, and several people died from carbon monoxide poisoning. So it's a very real fear. And we tried a lot of different things, like we put the insulation on the windows to try to keep it from being 20 degrees in our house. And we finally decided that the safest, warmest place to be would be our van. And we ate staples like peanut butter and jelly and prepackaged foods that we had, like fig bars and lots of brownies. We ate a lot of brownies. I'll probably be eating a lot of brownies this week too. Something I've been trying very, very hard to do is meet myself where I'm at. There's a little bit of a brain fog that's happening, and I'm having a little trouble answering questions in a timely manner. So I'm just giving myself that extra minute to explain things. I'm being super patient, trying to be super patient with myself as I start to find new ways to navigate this. And it just feels like it was a horrible dream, because right now it's 65 degrees in Austin, where last week I think it was 25, and then there was below freezing a couple days before that. People died, and it was really, really, really horrible. And it seems like this horrible frozen nightmare that happened, but it was a nightmare, so it wasn't real. And I'm telling you now, it's very real. So I think the temptation as we walk into next steps here is to mitigate or minimize or say, you know, it's not that big a deal. A lot of times people will say first world problems. And earlier in the year, I talked about let's all get rid of first world problems, because whatever your problem is, I'm really interested in hearing it. And I want to know what it is that's going on for you. A couple of weeks ago, I talked about, you know, whether it's sunshine or rain, I always want the weather report. And that's true. And I think that the temptation is so strong to say, we didn't have it as bad as the Hastons. Like, we only had power out for 20 hours. It's like, it doesn't matter. That was 20 hours you didn't have power. You didn't know when it was going to come back on. I think that was a terrifying thing too. It's like, we kept thinking it was going to come on. We kept thinking it was going to come on. And then at 77 hours when it did, that was amazing. And, you know, then we got the boil notice right after that. You have to boil your water to make it safe. As it turned out, they were doing a preventative measure and they didn't need to because it was totally safe. But in this case, I would say better safe than sorry. So all of this to say, if you have something going on, talk about it and don't minimize what's going on for you. Certainly listen to the other person and, you know, don't try to one-up them or lower your pain just because they are also in pain. I think that an important thing is to meet people where they are. That's what I'm doing this week. I'm being a little bit kinder to myself. Getting myself some treats, sleeping in a little bit more, all the things that I can do to try to restore stability. I invite you to do the same. If you are not in Texas and you didn't go through this, that's absolutely fine. Maybe reach out to somebody you know in Texas or another place that was affected by this. So ladies and gentlemen, that is the Professor Helps for this week. If you find it helpful, please subscribe. Go ahead and share. It's my weekly dose of motivation, inspiration, and frustration. And this is the message for the week. And this is the Professor signing off.